We're very honored today to have with us Dr. Lawrence Yun, the Chief Economist and Senior Vice President of Research for the National Association of REALTORS. He directs research activity for the association and regularly provides commentary on real estate market trends for its 1 million realtor members. Dr. Yun creates NAR's forecasts, participates in the economic forecasting panels, including the Blue Chip and the Harvard University Industrial Economist Council. He regularly appears on financial news outlets, is a frequent speaker at real estate conferences throughout the United States, and has testified before Congress. USA Today in 2008 listed him among the top 10 economic forecasters in the country. He has also been named among the 100 most influential real estate leaders by Inman News. Dr. Yun received his undergraduate degree from Purdue University. He earned his PhD from the University of Maryland at College Park. It is my honor to introduce Dr. Lawrence Yun.
Thank you. Very glad to be here. This is my first visit to Syracuse. I have a couple of colleagues back in my office. Office is in Washington, D.C. And they warned me that even in April in upstate New York, just watch the weather because they remember during their graduation it actually snowed. In Washington, this year it was unusually cold. One of the most beautiful time of the year is in the spring when the cherry blossom pops out. But this year, because the weather was cold, the cherry blossom was delayed in coming out. So it just started coming out this week. And yesterday, I believe it was 80 degrees. Today, maybe 75 degrees. But here I am in upstate New York. And I never argue with Mother Nature. I love Mother Nature, however it is presented. I was in Buffalo yesterday giving a talk, also in Rochester, and I'm here in Syracuse. And I have to say, in driving from Buffalo, Rochester, Syracuse, how beautiful the upstate New York is. Seeing the vast green grass, the farms, quite beautiful. And on top of that, to get the home prices, a good, decent home at $130,000. I mean, these are amazing quality of life issue, and I'm sure many people consider in terms of raising a family, this is a great place to live. Now, what is surprising to me, however, is that that it is not unusual that the property tax payment could be actually higher than the mortgage payment. So that's quite an unusual situation. So that may be one thing that you may want to correct, but otherwise it's a tremendous place to live. Let me just cut to the chase and give you a 3 forecasts that I see developing over the next couple of years, next 2-3 years, that I hope that you can possibly better answer some of your clients' questions, or maybe even you want to take the initiative and express some of the things that is likely to develop. The first item is that I believe that inflation will slowly creep up. We do not have any inflation today. In fact, inflation is at 2%, and that would be at the preferred inflation rate of the Federal Reserve. They want to see inflation rate at around 2%. In fact, many of you who know of someone receiving Social Security benefits, they got 2% cost of living adjustment in January for the precise reason, because inflation is 2%, cost of living adjustment situation is 2%. But because of certain development that is occurring, I think the inflation will begin to pop out into the mid-single digits of 4, 5, 6% in a couple of years. Not this year. I think this year will still be very, very manageable inflation situation, but in a couple of years, it will be something like 4, 5, 6%. And it has some implication for for the housing market, certainly for home buyers. I do not foresee inflation getting up to the double-digit pace of the 1970s. I was also chatting with some realtors who have been in the business for 30 plus years, And they clearly remember when the interest rate environment was 18%, and that high interest rate environment was due to the fact that inflation rate was high. So, but I don't anticipate the inflation rate to go that high because the central banks have clearly recognized that high inflation at double digit is harmful to the country, harmful to the people, harmful for economic growth. So we don't anticipate that. But still moving from 2% inflation today to 4, 5%, that's doubling in the inflation, and it will have some consequence on the impact. So let me explain why I believe that inflation will begin to slowly creep up. The pressure will begin to come up. First is that economy is in a recovery mode. I know that it is sometimes difficult to feel it because some people are saying, are we still in a recession or not? But in fact, we are technically, statistically out of the recession from 2010. Even though from many of the college graduates, they don't feel it. In fact, one of the interesting part was that recent Bloomberg Consumer Sentiment Survey, which came out, which showed modest increase, but the inside of that data shows quite revealing pattern. People who are on the higher income, high net worth, they're feeling much better. While people who are on the lower income or younger people, they are not feeling better. So even though we had this economic recovery, it appears to be a divergent economic recovery with some people benefiting more, other people not seeing it. But right now, the economy is in a recovery mode. The GDP, I think this year will grow about 2%. What is GDP? Is everyone's income in America all combined. Everyone's income all combined. How is that rising? It's rising at about 2% this year. And maybe next year it will gain momentum and possibly reach the 3%, which would then match up with the historical average. So the red line you see on the graph is the historical average, but one can see that from year 2000 all the way to today, there's been only a couple of times where we hit the 3% mark. So it's been a decade of essentially underperformance. And assuming that we reach 3% next year, it's not going to be this year, assuming 3%, then we finally approach something of a more decent economic growth next year. The reason why the economy, the momentum could build more is that household net worth has strongly recovered. Back in 2007, it was scary times. People who had stock market, 401k, you were looking at it and you said, wow, my retirement saving is disappearing quickly. But people who held on and not panic have pretty much recovered all their wealth. Stock market is reaching new highs. On top of that, in the past couple of years, home values have also turned a corner and rising. So a combination of housing wealth plus stock market wealth is now back up to the prior peak level. And I think this is where one is beginning to sense that people on the high income, higher net worth, because they are the ones who have concentration in the stock market wealth and also, say, homes, they are beginning to see this wealth recovery participation. But this is positive news, and it will provide some momentum for economic expansion. No recession at all over the horizon. Housing wealth is also recovering. This is 1 minus LTV. So it's actual housing equity. And one sees that during the housing market bust, it declined. And then now it is slowly coming back up. Credit card bill also has been tremendously declined, which is a good news for the economy going ahead, because this means that consumers have pretty much deleveraged. Many economists were concerned that the Americans, consumers had overborrowed, and therefore it will take multiple years to get back to some semblance of normality. But the credit card debt level has tumbled down very, very fast. Sometimes this is not the consumer choice. It's done by the banks. If you had a $3,000 credit card limit, they somehow brought it down to $2,000, so that automatically they force consumers to spend less. But the credit card debt level is down, which means is a good news going forward, which means that as the economy recovers, more jobs get created, that people can now spend more. They can use their credit card a little more and also further help boost the economy. This is a very interesting chart. This is a delinquency rate for the credit card situation, and it's been tumbling down very, very fast. And one is, let's say, 30 days late. How many people are 30 days late? Other one, how many people are 90 days late? But one can see it has tumbled down greatly. If I had overlaid this chart with mortgage delinquency rate, it will be a dramatic contrast. A person who is a little bit under stress financially, they have a choice between paying the credit card bill or a mortgage. Consumers are saying, I want to pay the credit card bill, I want to have the plastic. Home, I don't care about. So somehow the people, if they are given the choice, they want to make the credit card payment because delinquency rate is tumbling down very greatly. Now, regarding home mortgage delinquency, I think maybe that's one of the reasons is some people are completely demoralized because they're underwater, they have been underwater, and they don't see any hope of recovering, so they are saying, why should I pay? The other possibility is that in some areas, including New York State, you don't pay your mortgage, you don't lose your home. It takes just forever for the judicial process to go through the system before that it finally becomes a foreclosure and become an REO. So given the length of time, 2-3 years, people may be making just a strategic decision to say, I don't have to pay mortgage, but I still get to live in the home. I mean, it's somewhat of a gaming of the system. Maybe it helps the person in distress buy some time additional, but this delay in foreclosure is slowing down the housing market recovery. And New York State right now is one of the few states where price growth so far has been more minimal compared to the rest of the country. So when I mentioned the household wealth recovering, these are in many states like Arizona, places in the middle of America, say Kansas, Oklahoma, but not necessarily yet in the New York State because you still have a long backlog of foreclosed mortgages that is not current, but not yet gone through the system because of long delays in the foreclosure process. So what's happening is that consumers are in a position to re-leverage up. The wealth is up, so consumer spending, which is the red line, will definitely be in a positive. Business spending tends to be much more volatile, and it's the blue line. And business spending will also be in the positive just because they are flush with cash. If you look at Google, Apple Computer, they're just flush with cash. It's not being redeployed into the market, but because of that buffer, I don't see the business spending possibly turning negative, which means that two big components of the economy, consumers and businesses, it will remain positive. We will not go into an economic recession. That means as the economy begins to pick up, there's more activity in the economy, more people coming to the retail shop, the shop owner have less incentive to cut prices. And in fact, if anything, they have incentive to possibly raise prices given more traffic at the retail shop. So greater economic activity always leads to somewhat of a upward pressure on the prices. So this is a 1 mile pressure point where you may get some inflationary pressure because of the consumer spending and business spending. Other improving area is on the trade deficit. Trade deficit has shrunk greatly, and this is principally coming from what is known as the energy renaissance that is occurring in North America. New oil discovery in North Dakota, the natural gas production in Pennsylvania, and as a result, America is importing far less energy than before, and this is helping on the trade deficit, which also means helping in the broader economy. Jobs, so far, close to 6 million job creation from the low point. 6 million job creation from the low point. However, we need to be mindful that we lost 8 million jobs. So lose 8, add 6, we're still down. So we're not yet fully recovered. And over this time span, you have every year high school graduates, college graduates looking for a job. So one can say we should be happy with the 6 million jobs, but this is not enough to first fully recover all those jobs that have been lost, but also we're not creating new jobs for the college graduates. And I think, again, I mentioned about the Bloomberg survey where many of the younger people are still dissatisfied, And that's the reason that even though we are creating jobs, the creation of the job pace is still sluggish, not very robust, and therefore people are not feeling that economic recovery, particularly among many young adults in America. Jobs are being created. Unemployment rate, which had been at 10%, is now at 7.6%. This chart is not unemployment rate because I used to have unemployment rate chart. And every time I put up the unemployment rate going down with job creation, a lot of hands goes up and say that measure is fraud, it is wrong, it doesn't include that, something is wrong. And those are valid responses. Without going into detail of that, I want to come up with a clean measure. This is a clean measure. Employment rate, not unemployment rate, but employment rate. How many of the adult population are working today? And I'm missing a decimal point, so it's 54%, 56%, 58%, and so forth. Today, 58% of adults are working. It used to be 64% of adults. Or one may say, well, 64% was a little high. Maybe the normal is 62% of the adults are working. I mean, there are retirees, people over 65, many are not working, and also housewives who choose not to work and so forth. So it's never 100%. So 64 or 62% perhaps is normal. Today is 58%. So we had this economic downturn. We are creating jobs, but the creation of the job pace is such that we are only treading water. We are not really improving on the employment rate. Only 58% of the adult population are working, and hence what this means is that the job creation that you have been seeing so far is sluggish. It's not enough to raise the employment rate higher back up to 62% level, because we need to do much faster job creation in order to get up there, because right now it's 58% of the people working compared to normal 62%. That's our 4 percentage point gap. I mean, those are large gap that needs to be filled. Inflation, so far no pressure, but with greater economic activity, more people coming to retail shop and such, I think there will be slight upward pressure on prices. Another reason why I think inflation rate will begin to pop out is this graph, principally this graph. And I think this is the graph that the Federal Reserve is greatly underappreciating. What is this graph? Red line is very simple to explain. It is renters' rent. How much are the renters paying in their rent, and how is that changing from one year to the next? Today is rising at about 3% nationally. When I talk with private sector companies who do apartment rents, they are saying nationwide it's not rising at 3%, it's actually rising at 4%. So there's slight discrepancy between what the private sector is measuring versus what the government, this is the government data, what the government is measuring. So 3% or 4%, but let's say there could be some sampling differences, so the red line is representing about 3%. The blue line is a murky, fuzzy figure. Hypothetical. Many of you are homeowners. The blue line represents for homeowners, if you were to rent out your home, what is the rent would you charge? And how is that rent changing from one year to the next? It's not a market exchange. It's a hypothetical. And I don't know how a government statistician come up with that figure, but they come up with that figure. And that blue line is saying it's rising at 2%. If anything, one would think that, well, homeowner equivalency rent, that hypothetical figure, should at least match up with renter's rent at some point. But right now, it's not matching up, so maybe there is a lag time before it begins to rise. Why is this chart important? Because the consumer price inflation, it measures so many products. Apple, you buy apple fruit, furniture, clothes, chewing gum, many things. The biggest weight to the consumer price inflation is these two items. These two items makes up 30% of the weight on consumer price inflation. And right now, the rent is rising at 3% according to government, even though private sector is saying it's rising at more like 4%. And the homeowner equivalency rent is somehow lagging behind at 2%. But let's say that it begins to catch up. So the renter's rent begins to rise to 4%. Remember, we have a falling vacancy rate, housing shortage. And then the owner equivalency rent eventually catch up with the red line. That means automatically it will put upward pressure on overall broader inflation. So the broader inflation today, which is rising at 2%, very manageable, I think it will be rising at higher rate down the line, maybe in 18 months or maybe in 2 years. But this graph is clearly implying, at least to me, that the inflation will be picking up. Furthermore, Federal Reserve has pursued a zero interest rate policy for a prolonged period, essentially saying borrow money at zero. It's not for you, by the way. It's for the financial institution that can essentially borrow at zero. But you would think that if the financial institution can borrow at zero, they can lend it at a slightly lower rate for the consumers. And that's the goal. Furthermore, there's something called the balance sheet expansion, quantitative easing, where the Federal Reserve is buying much of the bonds and mortgage-backed securities. Way to think about this is that assume you want to create a hedge fund and you want to do some investment in government bonds or mortgage-backed securities. You get clients' money, trying to find the clients, gather money, and you would buy a portfolio. Federal Reserve is in essence doing the same thing. They are buying mortgage bonds, government bonds, except they're not finding clients to gather money. They are printing money to buy these things. So you have a combination of ultra-low interest rate policy with printing of the money. And if I remember Econ 101 textbook, and I actually taught some economic undergraduate courses, and if I put a little quiz, what do you expect regarding inflation? Higher, no change, or lower if Federal Reserve pursues zero interest rate policy and printing a lot of money? Well, naturally, Econ 101 textbook will say higher inflation. But today, we don't have higher inflation, even though this is going on. So you would either say Econ 101 textbook is wrong, or something else is happening, or maybe a delayed lag time. America is a very fortunate country. We have this special privilege that no other country has, which is that the US dollar serves as a global reserve currency. I mean, you have $20 bill in your pocket and you use that for medium of exchange. But in many countries, they have that $20 or even $100, Benjamin Franklin's, and they don't use that for medium of exchange, but they use that as store of value. What does that mean? Russian factory workers, they get paid in rubles, they exchange it into US dollars because they don't trust the rubles. The ruble may lose value. Venezuela, Argentina, even in our arch enemy, America's arch enemy, Iran, Iranian citizens don't trust their government. They go to the black market, exchange Iranian currency into the US dollar because they don't trust their government. So this is the privilege that America has that many other countries do not, which is that America can print money yet not have inflation, or at least not right away. And that is what's happening today. So we are printing a lot of money, but because it serves as a global reserve currency, we are not getting the inflation. But one has to ask, at some point, surely it will lead to inflation. That's what Econ 101 textbook says. And then also you may want to ask the question, why is everyone storing their money in dollars? Why is the people in Iran liking the US dollars? Why not other currency? And you may even say, well, euro is shaky with Greece, Cyprus, and all this other problem. And also you have the situation like maybe Switzerland. Switzerland, they don't print money. Maybe you want to get some Swiss francs. The problem with that is no one knows what Swiss franc looks like. Everyone knows what Benjamin Franklin looks like. And so, but Swiss franc, because it's not liquid, it cannot serve as a global reserve currency. So automatically, by default, right now, US dollar is serving as a global reserve currency. But still, one has to ask at what point, because America can buy time. America can buy time with the printing of the money. But because of this simple fact, zero interest rate policy, printing of the money, and then you have the rent component surely rising more in the upcoming years, that we would have a higher inflation. And one thing that is taming the inflation in the US is also the velocity of money, how many times the dollar flips. So right now, because of the sluggish economy, it has not been flipping, but with the economic improvement, I think the velocity of money will be flipping at a little higher pace, so there will be additional pressure coming on. Alan Greenspan, when he left the Federal Reserve, he wrote a book. And he said he anticipates somewhat about higher inflation in the next decade. So he wrote this book maybe when he left, I guess, 7 or 8 years ago. He expects a little higher inflation. And he expects higher inflation because of this graph, which is the red line is government spending, blue line is the tax revenue, and you see a huge budget deficit. And Alan Greenspan believes the institutional structure of Washington is such that people in Washington cannot make hard choices. So they will run a budget deficit large amount for a prolonged period. And if that's the case, only way to fill that gap is for the Federal Reserve to buy government bond, which is essentially printing of the money to buy the government bond. So if Washington cannot make those hard choices to narrow the gap, then again, that's an added inflationary pressure. Let me just go into what it means for you. Higher inflation will mean higher mortgage rates. Mortgage rates today are unbelievable, 3.5% average. I think this time next year, it'll be about 4.5%, and in 2 years, probably reaching 5%. People who have been in the industry for 30 years, 5% mortgage rate, bring it on. You know, that's no big deal. But still, nonetheless, it's a higher rate. So for consumers who are a little hesitant, you know, they are financially qualified, but they are saying, do I go in now? Maybe, you know, by large budget deficit, also this debt crisis, maybe I want to hold back. Well, you know, they should make whatever decision that is comfortable. But one thing they should factor in is that mortgage rate will be somewhat higher down the line. And hence, from consumers' point of view, or how you relate to your clients, I think this is something that you need to anticipate. I don't see it as somehow being a major obstacle to home sales, because 5% is clearly still at historically affordable rates. But nonetheless, it will be higher than what it is today. Second forecast is that I believe that home values would be meaningfully higher 3 years down the road. Demand is up, supply is down, simple supply and demand. Prices have already shown large increases in many parts of the country, not necessarily in New York State. And also because housing start is dragging their feet, that I think cumulatively one can anticipate about 15% price appreciation over the next 3 years. So 5% annual price appreciation. First, how do I get that forecast? This is the signing of the contracts. It's been rising and rising after the expiration of the home buyer tax credit. So there was some spike and surge when there was the $8,000 on the table, but once that disappeared, it plunged, but now it's coming back strongly. So the contract signing is coming back strongly. Buyers are coming back. Actual closing of the sale transaction is also coming back. It's at, I think, 6-year high in terms of the closing activity. We take a survey of realtor members across the country. It's about 3,000 people. Maybe there's one person from Syracuse who participated in the survey. And we ask a very simple question that is not yet hard-coded. MLS data is hard-coded. We want to know something before the MLS data, qualitative information. How is the foot traffic at open houses? More or less? What about the phone inquiries? Things like that. Very, very qualitative data. And the qualitative data is saying that beginning of last year, somehow things changed. Buyer interest suddenly spiked beginning of last year, and it is continuing up to today. So the buyer interest remained much higher than what it had been, but the seller interest is not coming to the market. So you have this discrepancy with buyers outpacing supply. So that will put upward pressure on prices. And in Buffalo, Rochester, and today when I talk with someone here in Syracuse, I'm very surprised that in upstate New York, that multiple bidding is occurring. I did not think that that would occur in the upstate New York, but that's what I'm hearing. And this graph is clearly representing that there are more buyers in relation to the sellers, at least in some neighborhoods where the property prices are correctly priced. Vacation home and second home market is also recovering. And I think the strong stock market recovery will be an impetus. Someone who's selling home up in the lake areas, I think people out in the New York City, they're accumulating quite sizable wealth. And I think they will be looking to buy a second home, so that market is recovering. Affordability, thanks to the low interest rate, is still very high, even though we have now rising prices. The low rate is easily compensating for the rising prices. And the inventory nationwide is at a 13-year low on existing homes. Let me just go into this. Newly constructed home inventory, it is at a 50-year low. So existing home inventory, 13-year low, newly constructed home inventory at 50-year low. These are visible inventory on the market. However, there's still a shadow inventory. Shadow inventories are those homes that is not yet on the market, but will surely come onto the market at some point in the future, because these are seriously delinquent mortgages, people who have not been making payments for more than 3 months, or in some foreclosure process, but not yet translated into REOs. So one sees that it's still elevated. The good news is that the level is declining. It's declining, which means that a few years ago, 1/3 of all transactions were distressed properties. Last year, it was only 25%. This year, I think it will be about 15%. So if you have a less of a distressed property coming onto the market because of the falling shadow, what will happen to the prices? Distressed property are negative, but you have a less of a negative. Two negatives makes a positive. I think that's how I learned in grammar course. So I think this will be elevating the median prices. So the median prices will be rising because you have a fewer of the negatives hitting the marketplace. In some states, the shadow inventory is rapidly declining. In Arizona, you don't make your mortgage payment, banks come in, they kick you out. And then they sell that property to an investor or first-time buyers. But not in New York State. This is the shadow inventory in so-called the judicial foreclosure states of Connecticut, Illinois. New York is that green line, and in fact, green line continued to rise. It's not even dipping, it continued to rise. I don't know how true this is. Some people commented that, no, this is not upstate New York, it's downstate New York. It's it's those people down there are the troublesome people. But this is also implying that the cleaning of the shadow is necessary to get a healthy housing market recovery, but you still have these shadows overhanging, which means that even though inventory levels are down, there could be more inventory, distressed inventory hitting the market because this has yet to be cleaned out in the process. So you have a pluses and minuses. Judges, court system tends to be sympathetic with distressed homeowners. They don't like the banks, so they're saying, banks, stay away. Let the distressed homeowners stay in their home. Let's give them some time. So it's helping the distressed homeowners repair their credit, improve their finances, or maybe give them some time to find a job. But it's also delaying the housing market recovery because you are seeing strong price increases in Arizona, but in New York State, not a strong price increase because you have this huge shadow to work with. Furthermore, there are some people who can game the system. I know that New York people, they're very good people, so I'm going to use New Jersey as an example. New Jersey is also a similar graph situation where they're also judicial foreclosure state. I have heard from realtors in New Jersey where they are saying that there are people gaming the system in New Jersey, which is that they don't pay their mortgage, knowing that they will not be kicked out. They sneak out at middle of the night, and then they find a renter and collect rent on those properties. So for 3 years, they will be collecting rents. And then once the property is foreclosed, well, it is foreclosed, but they're not living there. So it also invites potential strange activity of that sort. So one has to balance that out. You have the situation where, again, Arizona, you don't pay your mortgage, they kick them out. You have the fresh, healthy buyers coming in. People who are buying today are very, very financially healthy, whether investors or first-time buyers. But in New York State, you still have this overhang of shadow inventory that needs to run through the system. But nonetheless, nationwide home prices are rising, even though New York is trailing behind. And housing starts, which needs to increase because I mentioned about the newly constructed home inventory at a 50-year low, Any business that see a drastic reduction in inventory, you want to restock that inventory. And what's happening is that that green line is the historical average. That will be the normal level, yet the production activity is only slowly rising. Percentage-wise, it's like 25% growth, but we cannot have 25% growth. We need 100% growth in housing starts, yet we are not getting that. And interestingly, you feel like you're slapping the home builders to say, wake up, we need to build more homes. And the home builder will say, we want to build more homes, however, we cannot. They cannot obtain construction loans. Historically, many local builders, they relied on local banks to get the construction loans, but the local banks are now saying we don't do construction loans anymore, because if we do, someone from Washington will fly in, FDIC bank examiner, and say, why did you make that loan? And a lot of hassling and explaining to do. So they don't want to be bothered with that. Furthermore, Dodd-Frank bill, which is a massive document, and I'm sure many components for good purposes, but one of the unintended consequences is because of the very thick legislation, the small banks don't have the legal staff to review all that, and they're frozen. They don't know what to do, so they prefer not making the loans. So because of the lack of construction loans, housing start is not bouncing back as it could be. So you have the situation where the buyers are coming in, inventory declining. New York, you still have that shadow inventory, but the housing start is still lagging behind. So overall, the balance is that buyers are coming in, but the supply is slow. And therefore, it implies that the home prices would be pressured to go up. This is the chart I think that you will like best. This is the chart which implies that you are beginning to see some housing market recovery, more unit sales than before. And this recovery is likely to continue for multi-year period. Because the downturn has been quite severe, it's been very challenging, very painful, but the upturn will be a multi-year recovery. I think over the next 5 years, 4 of the next 5 years would be an improving year. There will be one hiccup. It's because all the economic data never move in a straight line. There's always movement. But I think over the next 5 years, 4 of those next 5 years will be an improving year because of this chart. And what is this chart? This chart is showing that the household formation has been greatly suppressed during the economic downturn. And it has been unprecedented suppression of multi-year. Quick translation, young adults not trying to find their own housing, young adults living with their parents, or people finding their 3rd roommate, 4th roommate. You can have increased population, but if people are living bunched up together, then you are not creating housing demand. But now, with the economy slowly creating jobs, you are seeing some bursting out of household formation. People are living in crowded spaces. It's just a matter of time they burst out. And because of the multi-year suppression, it's going to be a multi-year expansion. And this will be a key source of rising demand for rental housing, as well as rising demand for home ownership housing. So it will be a both increase in housing demand, broadly speaking. Syracuse so far, this year, the sales are up 3%. Prices, no meaningful change. Dollar volume roughly up 3%, but look at that inventory, down significantly, 26%. I'm wondering what happened to 2012. I think 2012, you actually had a good year. So you are comparing 2013 versus 2012, reasonably good year. So you had a good year last year, and it's still a slight improvement from that levels. But this is the job market picture in Syracuse areas. First, there's a seasonality, more jobs in the summer versus the winter months. But one sees that there's fewer jobs today compared to year 2000. So this is the area, I think, where I don't know, is that a tax policy? What is the source why jobs are not increasing in the Buffalo, Rochester, Syracuse? Very, very similar graphs in all 3 cities. So jobs are not coming around. I think I went over that. Regarding housing starts, one sees that Syracuse never had an overbuilding situation. So one may even say year 2000, 2001 is normal. Then you saw the suppression, and now it is still at a little suppressed levels. And this is a chart to show that all real estate is local, and Syracuse never had a big bubble. One is Phoenix, one is Syracuse. So Syracuse, I guess the good news is always that steady, slow run-up. rather than a massive increase and massive crash, but steady, slow increase. But this increase will be, I think, accelerating a bit just because the inventory levels are now falling. So given that inventory levels are falling, it will possibly turn the stick a little higher. So rather than rising 2 or 3% annually, you may begin to see 3 to 5% price appreciation case with the inventory down and the builders not able to build as before. Final forecast. So let me just quickly review. The first forecast, higher inflation, not alarmingly high inflation, which translates into higher mortgage rates. Second forecast, home prices have bottomed and it's going to be rising, higher home prices because demand is outpacing supply. And the third forecast is not really a business forecast, but more of an observation, something to think about, what does this mean? I think we will have more unequal wealth distribution in America because it's already baked into the system already. Why? The renters do not accumulate wealth. Homeowners accumulate wealth when home prices rise. And here's what's happening so far. This is the data from the Federal Reserve about renters versus homeowners. Everything you have minus everything you owe, what is the net worth? Renters have about $4,000 on average. Some renters more, other renters essentially nothing. Homeowners have substantially more, and you see the housing market crash, so it went down, but now home prices are rising. So if you look from 1998 all the way to today, renters, there's no movement at all. While homeowners, sometimes it goes up, sometimes it goes down. People are paying their mortgage, principal down over the time period, and home prices rise. That's pure equity. And we have become a renter nation, at least in the past 5-6 years. Rental population has been rising, while homeowner population has been stagnating. It is already baked in where we are going to have more unequal distribution because underwriting standard is preventing many of the good current renters from buying a home. Warren Buffett always had a very simple investment philosophy. Very simple. Buy low, not buy high. When the housing prices crash, it will be the most opportune time for the renters to get in. But renters got in during the bubble years, and then there was a short period of owners, and then they had to foreclose upon. So the most opportune time will be when the prices have crashed. Yet it is during this time period when the prices have crashed. I mean, Syracuse did not experience the crash, but from nationwide point of view, when the prices crash, when the underwriting standard greatly tightened to prevent the renters from buying. So it will be the most opportune time for the renters to get in, yet they are being denied with their tight underwriting standards. Tight underwriting standard has been very frustrating. You have encountered that. You know that there are some good renters who will be able to be a successful homeowners. But there is an opportunity because bank profits are now so high, they're flush with cash, they don't know what to do with this cash. And if you look at their quarterly financial statement, they are saying, we made more money because of mortgage originations. It seems like if they do more mortgage origination, they will make even more money. Because most of it's a tremendously well-performing mortgages of recent years. People who bought their home in 2010, 2011, 2012, I mean, they're not defaulting. All these defaulting mortgages are legacy asset of the bubble crash years. Recent home buyers, they're not defaulting. So it will be a perfect opportunity for the banking industry to loosen up a bit to get more renters into becoming homeowners, and there will be a win-win proposition. Renters are able to now accumulate wealth as they become homeowners, and also from banks' point of view, it's a well-performing mortgages, so they will make even greater profit, win-win situation. So that is possibility as we proceed through the year, as the business slowly recognize that there could be a good individual profit motive to make that decision. Let me just go to this. How tight is the underwriting standards? Bubble years discounted. We didn't check the credit score, a lot of stated income, fraudulent loans. But let's look at the normal time. Normal time meaning that year 2000, before the bubble years. If someone had a credit score of 720, they could easily get a conventional mortgages. Someone had a credit score of 660, they could even get a FHA mortgages. And back then, it was well performing. Today, in the past years, one see that credit scores are much, much higher, which means that someone with a credit score of 730, which would be very good, they cannot obtain conventional mortgages. They are turning towards FHA. And maybe they don't want to pay that high insurance fee, so they're saying, heck with it, I'm not going to go into the housing market. So this tight underwriting standard is preventing many of the good renters from participating in the wealth recovery that many homeowners participate. So the bottom line is that I think it will be a multi-year recovery because I don't see economic recession. I mentioned about the consumer spending, business spending, the deleveraging and releveraging situation. So I don't see any economic recession. Household formation bursting out will mean that there will be an improving year over the next 4 of the 5 years, and home prices will be rising. But the only thing to be mindful of is the mortgage rate will also be rising because of the inflationary pressures. So that will be the forecast. But a couple of risks to the forecast. The upside potential is we are getting this housing market recovery even with excessively tight underwriting standards. So what would happen if we went back to the normal underwriting standards? Even more buyers coming in. We just need more homes available for sale, and that's where the housing start needs to rise. So we hope the construction loan begins to be more readily available. But the downside potential is coming from Washington. This is my last slide, by the way. Yesterday, or is it today, President Obama came out with his budget proposals. And in it includes shaving of mortgage interest deduction. Now, it would require passing of the legislation by Congress, and I don't think Congress will pass the Obama budget, but that's what President wants. He wants a little shaving off the top on the mortgage interest deduction. Democrats are looking for all revenue sources, and they are saying, well, mortgage interest deduction, if we limit it, we can raise more revenue. Then you have the Republicans. Governor Romney, during his campaign, he was mentioning we need to limit deductions in order to lower the tax rates. And that will make the economy more efficient. So you have both parties looking at mortgage interest deduction changes. Democrat looking for revenue, Republican believing it somehow that it will make the economy more efficient. So we have this large budget deficit, and clearly this large budget deficit is not caused by the mortgage interest deduction, which has been in place for 100 years, something that has been in 100 years. You cannot say suddenly it's causing a budget deficit. But because of the large budget deficit, people in Washington are looking at it. At the end of the day, I don't think there will be any changes to it, but it requires our vigilance because elected officials were elected by you all across the country. And I just don't see how an elected official will go back to their constituents and say that we have changed the mortgage interest deduction to harm the wealth situation in the local community. I just don't see that. But they could change it if we're not vigilant, which is the reason why we need to be vigilant. When I say vigilant, what does that really mean in terms of the actual practice? Sometimes you get an email from NAR, National Association of REALTORs. Many of them are junk mails, and I understand you delete it right away. Good for you. But some are very important, call to action. And you would say that please make a couple of clicks. A couple of clicks takes only 10 seconds of your time. We have set up an infrastructure so that if you agree with certain issues, like mortgage interest deduction is important for my community, it may be something like that, and you click it, we set up an infrastructure so that a letter, personalized letter under your name would go to the member of your Congress and to the senator to say mortgage interest deduction is important. And people in Congress will tell you they don't read mails, but they do count how many comes in. So the fact that you are sending it, it definitely raises the profile. So I think that's something that we need to be very mindful of. There are other issues, things like trying to change the down payment requirement for conventional mortgages, which we are, again, monitoring very, very carefully because we think it's not the down payment, but people staying well within their budget that is the most important criteria in terms of loan performance. So these are some upside risk, downside risk. Be mindful of that. And finally, we have daily analysis by my staff on latest economic data. So whatever data comes out, my staff analyzes it and say, okay, this will impact housing market this way or that way, or commercial real estate this or that way. And you are invited to just sign up for our social media site. I believe that The real estate market went through tremendous challenges. We had 1.4 million members. We are now at 1 million. I think the shakeout in membership is a healthy development because we had way, way too many realtors. But given that now the market is recovering, this 1 million members, I hope it doesn't increase so that you have a larger economic pie that can be shared by the same number of people rather than more people trying to chip away at that pie. But people who survive through this very difficult time, I think you are in perfect position to benefit from the recovery. And I think, again, this recovery process over the next 5 years, 4 of the next 5 years, I think will be an improving year. So I wish you best of luck. Thanks for your patience, and thank you very much.